Hi everyone, this week I'm going to explore cloud computing and hopefully put some definition around what cloud computing actually is. There's a lot of information out there that is contradictory and sometimes not quite correct about cloud computing, and that means that people have a different understanding of what it actually is. So to help define it, I'm going to use the example of banks and how they've evolved over time to be almost a cloud environment.
Before I jump into that example, here's a quick definition of cloud computing according to a Google search. Now, this is a dictionary definition and it describes cloud computing as the practice of using a network of remote servers hosted on the internet to store, manage, and process data. What this is saying is that instead of your traditional setup for IT where you had a server in the corner that you ran and maintained yourself, cloud computing enables that information to be stored somewhere else, managed on your behalf, but you still have access to it. Now, there is one word in here that I do have a problem with, and that is the word hosted. I'll get onto that later, but I feel that's a word that doesn't quite accurately define what cloud computing is. So where do banks come into this? Well, banks have been around for centuries, and traditionally they've been a place where people could store their valuables or items of value. Now, often that was gold and cash. People would bring it in for safekeeping. It would be recorded in a general ledger and then safely stowed in the vault. If they wanted to take it out again, they would visit, the transaction will be recorded in the general ledger again, and their item removed from the vault and handed over to them. Quite an easy process for them, but very hard when they wanted to travel. Now, the banks came up slowly with processes that enable people to deposit money in one bank and withdraw it from another, but it was never easy and it was often confusing for a customer. What that general ledger meant for banks was it was very hard to record transactional information. In the case before, if someone wanted to travel, there was a lot of processes that needed to happen for money to be deposited in one bank in one city and then withdrawn from another bank in another city. As technology evolved, it meant that banks could replace the traditional general ledger with a digital general ledger. The information went from being in a leather-bound book to actually stored in a central database hosted within a processing center. And what that meant was a customer of a bank could walk into one branch in one town, deposit some cash, fly halfway around the world to a branch from that same bank, and withdraw that cash very easily. The transaction was recorded a lot simpler, and it was recorded centrally. It was held in one place. The banks no longer needed to have all these processes to match up the general ledgers between branches. So what's that got to do with cloud computing? Well, traditionally for companies who used computers, the information was all stored in a central server or a central server environment. Now, those servers may have been owned and maintained by the business themselves, or they may have been hosted in a data center, but all the information was stored there, and when the business wanted to access that information, they had to go directly to the server over the network. What cloud computing enabled is that the information could be stored on a more centralized scale, but accessed from anywhere in the world. Anything that had an internet connection and the right security credentials could access the cloud and get the information from it. What it meant for that company was that they could secure it still in the way they were before. It was available, but it was much more accessible. And just like the banks that started to centralize their general ledger, it made it easy for customers. Cloud computing is exactly that same concept as centralizing a general ledger into a digital environment and making it available. And that comes back to the point of the definition that I disagreed with, and that was the word hosting. The information is not hosted on the internet, it is still hosted on a physical server, but the internet makes it accessible.
In summary, cloud computing is just another way of ensuring that your information or systems are accessible, available, and secure. They give you availability at a more global scale and do it at a cheaper budget than you might otherwise afford. In next week's video, I'm going to explore a little bit around cloud storage and why it's not considered backup. Have a great weekend.